And Jeffrey Edward Epstein?
Mr. Epstein, how long have you been sexually attracted to underage minor females?
Are you kidding?
Epstein has been charged with 1 count each of sex trafficking and sex trafficking conspiracy.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients?
It's sitting on my desk right now.
To review.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? That is unbelievable.
These files were made up by Comey. They were made up by Obama.
You said Jeffrey Epstein committed
Suicide. People don't believe it.
We are experiencing one of the darkest government conspiracies in modern history. Some might even argue calling this a conspiracy would be foolish, because in recent events, we have encountered some of the most obvious signs of a full-fledged cover-up ever: the protection of elite pedophiles and the suppression of justice for victims. I'm of course talking about the case of Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most high-profile cases of alleged elite blackmail and child trafficking in recent memory. In today's video, I'll be doing a deep dive into the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, resurfacing his relationship to popular government and celebrity figures, his alleged ties to intelligence agencies around the world, and even events that are occurring right now as of the making of this video. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the dark history of Jeffrey Epstein, the worst cover-up of all time. Many know Jeffrey Epstein as a man who was very chummy with the elite, a man who seemed to be everywhere, seen in photos with current US President Donald Trump, former President Bill Clinton, and even the Duke of York, Prince Andrew. He collected relationships like trading cards, and one would assume with how many connections he had, he would have most likely been born into a wealthy family who had some sort of status and higher power. But this isn't the case. What if I told you this guy came from a working class neighborhood in New York and began his ascent into elite perversion from the humble classrooms of Dalton High School, where he worked as a math and physics teacher? Well, that would be completely accurate. In 1974, Jeffrey Epstein landed the job at 21 despite having no college degree, and even back then, he was known as the creepy teacher you may want to stay away from. He was charming, no doubt, but in that disturbing, manipulative kind of way. His behavior quickly started to raise eyebrows when he began flirting with the underage females at the school, making inappropriate advances and showing up to parties where underage students were drinking, apparently thinking he was hot shit, but everyone around him just felt uncomfortable. However, despite this, Epstein was a master opportunist, and the future of his pedophile empire would begin with a simple parent-teacher conference. One of the parents of a student was supposedly so impressed with Epstein during this conference that they ended up connecting him with a man named Alan Greenberg, who was the CEO of a huge investment bank called Bear Stearns. This was the first of Epstein's connections that eventually propelled him to the status that he had years later. When he was fired from the school for poor performance, Greenberg offered him a job at Bear Stearns, where he eventually climbed the ranks and became a huge financial advisor. In 1981, he set up his own banking firm called the Intercontinental Assets Group, which would help people recover money from scandals they were victims of. However, it was at this point that he started to make a name for himself and got involved with extremely wealthy, influential, and oftentimes shady people, including Adnan Khashoggi, who was a Saudi arms dealer in the Iran-Contra affair, Stephen Hoffenberg, who was part of one of the largest Ponzi schemes in US history, and former attorney John Mitchell, who went to prison for many crimes related to the Watergate scandal. In 1988, he started his own company called J. Epstein & Company, where he started to meet the richest of the rich, because this company exclusively helped billionaires manage their assets. However, he kept all but one of his clients secret, being Leslie H. Wexner, the founder of L Brands and Victoria's Secret. He was the only public client of Epstein that people knew about. He also became involved with the top of elite society, becoming acquaintances with a number of politicians, movie stars, scientists, and other celebrities. Eventually, Epstein would invest in several financial ventures over the years and make a name for himself, becoming a shadowy figure in high finance, which is precisely where this story takes a dark turn. Epstein's net worth is listed at $560 million around the time of his death. It's hard to pinpoint how much money he had around the 90s when he first branched into his lavish lifestyle, but over the years he acquired 5 main properties that all had some very questionable and odd belongings inside it. He acquired a Manhattan townhouse gifted by Leslie Wexner, his Palm Beach estate, an apartment in Paris, a ranch in New Mexico, and of course the infamous Little St. James Island in the US Virgin Islands, but we'll be delving into that later. But across all these residences, it showed what a freak Epstein really was. Reportedly, framed nude photos, massage tables lined with sex toys and lube, a life-sized female doll hanging from a chandelier, and even bathroom soap shaped like genitalia were found at a number of his residences. And the amount of massage tables he owned was not an exaggeration. It's reported that he required 3 massages every single day. His life revolved around this. So much so that it became the very beginning of his criminal history. Epstein became known for associating with young girls outside his Palm Beach home. In 2005, when Epstein was 52 years old, he found himself entangled in his first legal case when a 14-year-old girl and her parents came forward stating that Epstein molested their daughter at his Palm Beach mansion along with several other young girls. Specifically, it was said he would exchange money for these girls to give him massages. The FBI got involved and interviewed 5 alleged victims and 17 witnesses who all shared the same story. This prompted a raid on his Palm Beach residence, where they found 2 hidden cameras and, disturbingly, in the context of who Epstein was, receipts for books on S&M. But the most disturbing aspect was the pictures of girls he had framed across his house. Some of them were of girls police had already interviewed. And when the victims began to pile up more and more during the investigation, reaching as high as 80 potential victims by the end of it, Epstein's innocence was looking more and more impossible, especially when allegations came out that Epstein had 12-year-old triplets flown in from France for one of his birthdays, where he abused them and then had them flown back to France the following day. It was alleged that he did this multiple times with young girls all across the world, some from South America, former Soviet countries, Europe, and even Jean-Luc Brunel's modeling agency was rumored to be supplying these girls to Epstein. The then police chief of Palm Beach stated, "This was not a he said, she said situation. This was 50-something she's and 1 he, and the she's all basically told the same story." And the disturbing thing about all of this is Epstein didn't seem ashamed or embarrassed that any of this was coming out. Further down the line, he even told a New York columnist, "What can I say? I like young girls." It seemed almost as if he knew he would only get a slap on the wrist for this type of behavior, which is exactly what happened. In July of 2006, the FBI were prepared to launch a full-scale investigation into Epstein, codenamed Operation Leap Year. They would essentially be probing everything from victims to co-conspirators and witnesses, eventually resulting in a 53-page document of evidence that, in a perfect world, would have had Epstein thrown behind bars for a very long time. Whatever the document had in it was the key to this entire case. DOJ analysis suggests it had testimonies, damning appointment bookings and flight logs, CSAM material, and even mountains of evidence on co-conspirators. Evidence that they were uncovering a full-blown trafficking ring. There were 5 known women that allegedly helped Epstein run these operations. The first, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime girlfriend and closest associate, acted as his primary recruiter, luring and grooming young girls under the guise of work or mentorship. She would later get convicted, but not at this point in time. The second, Sarah Kellen, was allegedly Epstein's personal assistant, who scheduled appointments for Epstein to engage in acts with these underage girls. The third, Nadia Marcinkova, was allegedly a Yugoslavian sex slave he groomed into helping him, acting as a trainer for these young girls who would also participate in the abuse at times. The fourth, Leslie Groff, allegedly handled Epstein's technical work, managing his communication, booking girls for travel, and handling payments. And finally, the last, Adriana Ross, was a former model and allegedly another one of his assistants. She even helped remove some electronics from Epstein's house before the initial police raid to hide damning evidence. However, despite all the obvious signs a trafficking ring was running right under everyone's noses, the document of evidence never made it to court because of something we like to call the sweetheart deal. The Sweetheart Deal was a non-prosecution agreement approved by then US Attorney Alexander Acosta. This plea deal was the biggest middle finger to Epstein's victims that the court could have given the green light on. As long as Epstein agreed to convictions of much lesser charges, then all federal charges would be dropped. The FBI would have to shut down their investigation, and all 5 of Epstein's co-conspirators would be let off the hook. All Epstein had to do was plead guilty to minor prostitution charges, serve 18 months in prison, register as a sex offender, and pay restitution to a number of his victims. He agreed and was sent to prison on June 30th, 2008. The most disgusting thing about this is the victims had no say in whether this went through or not. They weren't even notified that this happened until it happened, and there was nothing they could do about it. It makes you think, why would someone who was so obviously guilty of the worst crimes imaginable be treated so well, using legal loopholes to get his sentence reduced as much as possible, especially when it came out that he was offered privileges in prison that no one convicted of the crimes he did usually get, including housing in a private wing of the jail, a 12-hour work release 6 days a week, his cell door was left unlocked, he was allowed full access to television, and he was allowed a personal driver to drive him to and from work in jail. Then, after being released 13 months later, 5 months short of his full sentence in July of 2009, he continued his life as a public level 3 sex offender and was told he had to check in with NYPD every 90 days. And even though failing to check in is a felony offense, he faced no consequences when doing this. It makes you think how all this treatment was possible. Well, it's because this rabbit hole may go deeper than we expect. Alexander Acosta, the man who originally gave Epstein the plea deal, came under attack by many who wanted to see justice served. Years later, in 2017, he made a statement that the reason he offered this plea deal was because Epstein belonged to intelligence and was above his pay grade. Though he never stated which intelligence he belonged to, many theories surfaced that he had ties in the CIA, FBI, and/or Mossad. However, these weren't just baseless rumors, especially when you tie in Epstein's interesting history with Israel. First of all, Epstein was of Jewish background. Secondly, Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, was often rumored to be a Mossad contact through his deep ties to Israel elites. He died in 1991 after falling off his yacht, but many believe he was murdered to keep damning intelligence information from coming out. Epstein was known to be close with Robert, as it was his girlfriend's father, but that's not all. Epstein was also known to have ties to Ehud Barak, the ex-prime minister of Israel. Later, in 2015, he invested in Barak's Israeli security startup called Carbine, and this didn't appear like it was just a business relationship, as Barak could be seen entering Epstein's New York townhouse in 2016 after Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. He had half of his face covered, almost as if he didn't want people to know he was visiting him. But then, Israel-Canadian businessman Ben Menashe came out and told journalists that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad spy, specifically stating that he served to gather compromising material on powerful people in order to blackmail them. And then there's the cameras. The cameras are some of the most obvious signs of blackmail that are publicly available. Remember when I said during the police raid of his Palm Beach residence that they found 2 hidden cameras? Yeah, it's believed that those played a much bigger role than anyone ever thought, especially when you realize that all of Epstein's residences were wired with surveillance in compromising areas, including bathrooms and bedrooms. Ghislaine Maxwell later told a friend that specifically Epstein's private island was completely wired with surveillance, taping everyone on the island as an insurance policy. As with any operation as sick as this was, it couldn't remain completely secret forever. Because over the years, these tapes became even more apparent as more and more victims of Epstein began to come forward and tell their stories after he was released from prison. This included women who remained anonymous and those who publicly filed civil cases against him, including Sarah Ransom and Virginia Giuffre, both who accused Epstein of sexual assault. However, Virginia Giuffre's story is very disturbing in particular. In court hearings beginning from December of 2014, she made some very shocking claims in a sworn statement. She claimed that she had been sexually trafficked by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at the age of 17, where she was forced to engage in lewd acts with both of them and other powerful figures, namely Prince Andrew. Epstein's former attorney Alan Dershowitz, Jean-Luc Brunel, Glenn Dubin, Marvin Minsky, and Governor Bill Richardson. She stated that she, along with several other young girls, had been recruited as early as the late 90s to be slaves of the pedophile elite. She believed that there had been videos of her engaging in these acts that the FBI had access to and kept under wraps, though everyone she named denied any allegations, and it failed to get anybody convicted. Recently, she died at the age of 41 of suicide on April 25th, 2025. And although that's the official cause of death, her father believes that, quote, somebody got to her, attempting to silence her from making any more incriminating statements. Now, by this point, you may be asking who could have been on those tapes, and why would the FBI be holding this information from the public? Well, here's a list of all known high-profile people that Epstein had been in contact with over the years. This isn't assigning guilt to any of these individuals, this is just what's publicly available. The list starts with those already mentioned by Virginia Giuffre, Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz, Jean-Luc Brunel, Glenn Dubin, Marvin Minsky, and Bill Richardson. Here's the rest. Former President Bill Clinton, current President Donald Trump, former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, former US Secretary of State John Kerry, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Victoria's Secret CEO Leslie Wexner, Bill Gates, Leon Black, Jess Staley, former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, Joshua Cooper Ramo, former White House counsel Kathy Rumler, Tom Barrack, Michael Jackson, David Copperfield, Frederick Fekkai as celebrity hairstylist, Woody Allen, Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Blanchett, Stephen Hawking, Kevin Spacey, George Lucas, Alec Baldwin, Naomi Campbell, Mick Jagger, Noam Chomsky, and finally Lawrence Krauss. Many of these names come from Epstein's private jet logs and the Little Black Book that Epstein kept to keep track of acquaintance contact information. However, this doesn't allude to any of these individuals being involved in any sexual abuse or wrongdoing whatsoever, as these could have been business associates as well. Although, his Boeing 727 private jet wasn't nicknamed the Lolita Express by locals of the Virgin Islands for no reason. Oh yeah, and what was the deal with that little St. James Island anyways? Little St. James, Epstein's private island, was known to locals as many less innocent names, including Isle of Babes, Island of Sin, Pedophile Island, and Orgy Island. On this 78-acre resort, you'll see mountain peaks rising from the Caribbean ocean floor, beautiful palm trees, and crystal blue waters. And you also might see Jeffrey Epstein getting out of the Lolita Express with girls young enough to be his daughters. An anonymous former air traffic controller claimed, "On multiple occasions I saw Epstein exit his helicopter, stand on the tarmac in full view of my tower, and board his private jet with children, female children." Another employee at the airstrip noted how it almost became somewhat of a joke. They stated, "Every time he landed or took off, it was always brought up. We'd always be joking, how many kids are on board this time?" He didn't even attempt to hide it, because on this island, Epstein ruled, and he referred to it as his main residence. Including a mansion and guest houses, over 70 members of staff helped run security, maintenance, and transportation. This was Epstein's main base of operations, hidden from public view and perfect for running an illegal trafficking ring. This is the location where Virginia Giuffre insisted her own abuse occurred. The Lolita Express was logged at around 600 flight hours per year in the 2000s and was used as Epstein's primary means of transportation across countries. But it also flew several high-profile individuals, including Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Kevin Spacey, Prince Andrew, Chris Tucker, and several others. However, only Prince Andrew is confirmed to have visited the actual island, and he visited several times. Epstein even bought the neighboring Great St. James Island in 2016, likely to expand this trafficking operation. However, Epstein found himself in more legal trouble when more and more female victims started to come out accusing him of trafficking minors, and the case was forced to be reopened, and that's when everything changed. On July 6, 2019, Epstein was arrested by the FBI Crimes Against Children Task Force in New Jersey as soon as he stepped out of the Teterboro Airport on sex trafficking charges. He was jailed at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. The day of his arrest, about a dozen FBI agents raided his Manhattan townhouse and turned up damning evidence of sex trafficking, finding thousands of explicit photographs of young-looking girls, including hundreds in a locked safe that were meticulously labeled. Inside this safe, there were also several CDs with handwritten labels including the descriptions "Young Name plus Name, Misc Nudes 1, and Girl Pics Nude," shedding even more light onto the blackmailing theory. On July 8th, prosecutors charged him of sex trafficking and conspiracy to traffic minors for sex. His girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested nearly a year after Epstein, when more and more evidence was stacked against her as his main accomplice. She would be convicted of sex trafficking of a minor, transporting a minor for sexual activity, and 3 conspiracy charges, and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison on June 28, 2022. Meanwhile, Epstein awaited trial for his full conviction, but that never happened, because in the month following the arrest, he was found dead. On the early morning of June 23, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was discovered semi-conscious on the floor of his jail cell at around 1:30 a.m., showing marks around his neck. At the time, he was sharing the cell with Nicholas Tartaglione, a former NYPD officer awaiting trial for multiple murders. Authorities questioned Tartaglione, but he denied any involvement in Epstein's condition. Correctional staff initially considered it a suicide attempt, but did not dismiss the possibility of foul play or a staged incident. Multiple reports circulated, some suggesting Epstein tried to hang himself, others speculating that injuries were superficial or potentially inflicted by his cellmate. In response, jail officials placed Epstein on suicide watch following the incident. Roughly 6 days later, on July 29th, Epstein was removed from suicide watch and reassigned to a special housing unit where he was supposed to have a new cellmate. Jail authorities notified the Department of Justice that Epstein would not be left alone and that guards would perform 30-minute welfare checks. However, those precautions were not followed as planned. On the night of August 9th, Epstein's new cellmate was transferred out, leaving him alone. Compounding the issue, the required half-hourly checks were skipped entirely that night. The 2 correctional officers on duty reportedly fell asleep and failed to monitor Epstein's unit for several hours. To add to the confusion, 2 security cameras outside Epstein's cell also malfunctioned that same night. The next morning, at around 6:30 a.m., Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell. Emergency procedures were immediately initiated, and he was transported to a nearby hospital. Later that day, the Bureau of Prisons and Attorney General William Barr stated that Epstein's death appeared to be a suicide, though no official conclusion had yet been reached. An autopsy on Jeffrey Epstein was conducted a day later. Initial findings suggested he may have forcefully leapt from the top bunk of his cell, which could explain his injuries apart from the typical signs of hanging. The report noted multiple fractures in his neck, including a break in his hyoid bone, a U-shaped bone in the neck. While hyoid fractures can happen in suicides involving long drop hangings, they're far more commonly found in cases of strangulation. Renowned forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht pointed out that a forward-leaning hanging position like the one Epstein allegedly used typically wouldn't produce such neck bone damage. Still, the official public cause of death was suicide by hanging. Many still believe that Epstein was silenced to prevent the information of blackmailed individuals from coming out. In July of 2025, however, the DOJ and FBI released footage showing the outside of Epstein's cell undisturbed, though that footage was not able to be independently verified. A minute was found missing from the footage soon after, where the clock jumps from 11:58 to 12. A Wired investigation found that the video had been modified despite the FBI's claim that it was raw footage, and that nearly 3 minutes were cut out of the video. People speculate that during this missing time frame, something shady had happened, and may have been the time of Epstein's death. Whatever the case, this story is about to get a lot more interesting, because on December 19th, 2023, New York judge Loretta Preska ordered a list with names of more than 170 Epstein associates to be unsealed in the future, giving anyone till January 1st, 2024 to appeal and have their name removed from the documents, and that's when everyone lost their minds. Between 2021 and 2025, under the Biden administration, many right-wing commentators speculated that President Biden was suppressing a roster of Epstein's clients. Kash Patel, who at the time had not yet assumed the FBI director role, asserted that the FBI held on to Epstein's secret blacklist. He encouraged a potential Trump administration to release it if Trump was elected. During his 2024 presidential campaign, Donald Trump mentioned he would have no problem releasing more Epstein-related documents upon re-election, adding that a client list probably will be revealed. In February 2025, Fox News' John Roberts asked U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi whether the Justice Department planned to publish the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients, to which Bondi responded,
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my gosh?
Not yet.
Meanwhile, on June 5th, 2025, during a heated exchange on X, Elon Musk announced, "Time to drop the really big bomb. Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public." By July 7th, the DOJ issued a memo stating no additional Epstein documents would be released. At a subsequent cabinet meeting, this is what Donald Trump had to say.
You still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. Are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
Within public discussion, Bondi faced significant backlash, and Democrats in the House moved to compel her to release all Epstein-related records. As of July 13th, Trump's stance is that the Epstein files are falsified documents created by his political opponents, such as the Biden administration, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton. He referred to it as the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. On July 16th, Trump posted on Truth Social, "Their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this bullshit hook, line, and sinker. Let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work." Many people in online spaces have theorized that Trump, for whatever his reason may be, does not want the Epstein client list to be released. Some believe his own name is in the files due to his close connection to Jeffrey Epstein in the past. Others believe people close to him may be in the files and he doesn't want to publicly smear their name. However, the most interesting theory, in my opinion, is that Trump is holding on to the client list for leverage on the same powerful individuals Epstein may have blackmailed. Whatever the case, it seems the Epstein client list will at this point in time remain a shadowy conspiracy as part of this case. The gaps in surveillance, unexplained injuries, unusual legal maneuvers, and the powerful names tied to Epstein's social circles have made his life and death one of the most controversial in modern memory. While official investigations maintain that Epstein took his own life, public suspicion continues to surround the case, fueled by inconsistencies and the absence of accountability for many of those connected to him, and people are outraged. What do you guys think? Will these files or more evidence ever surface about him? And do you believe this is indeed a cover-up? Thank you all for your support, and I'll see you in a new video very soon.